What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you something hopefully a little less depressing than some of the news we've been covering lately, as honestly I could do with something a little less doom and gloom myself. But that is, of course, the fact that a remake for Gothic 2, at the very least, seems very likely, especially given the success of the Gothic 1 remake, and a whole bunch of other factors we're going to get into over the course of this video, but a couple of things up front. So, I just want to point out that nothing is official, nothing is confirmed. There are simply so many factors pointing towards this being the logical next step for Alchemia, the studio behind the Gothic 1 remake, that it's honestly a little harder for me to imagine a situation where they don't do it. On top of that, though, if you are completely unaware and you've only played that original Gothic 1 remake, you may well not know that the actual series is a trilogy. And before someone jumps in my comments, there was a fourth game that was briefly called Gothic 4 that was actually dropped from its title later on because the game itself doesn't really have almost anything to do with the Gothic series and was only there because of some publisher nonsense, and it's really not worth talking about. The main series is a trilogy. And so, if you're a fan of that series and you saw this remake for the original, you may well then be wondering, what about 2 and 3? But in particular, 2 especially, which is generally considered to be the best one of the lot. 3 is a different beast, and we'll also get into that in this video, but a little bit later. So, let's first get into all the reasons that I obviously believe that 2 is seemingly very likely. For starters, Gothic 1 Remake came out, did very well. It's sitting on very good reviews, it seems to have sold well. They announced roughly a week after its initial release that it had already sold 500,000 copies, and that was over a month ago, so it's hard to say exactly where it's at right now. But more importantly, THQ Nordic and Alchemia themselves seemed happy with that number. With AA game development, and especially the fact that they are overseas, makes it kind of difficult for me, at the very least, to estimate exactly how much money they would have made off of this, but they seem to be very happy with the sales. Most of the gripes about the game are things they've already been addressing. They've already released some patches, getting rid of some of the most obnoxious stuff, and by all accounts, it simply seems to have done quite well on that front. In fact, one of my main takeaways from my own review was basically that I think they did a surprisingly great job capturing that original game's experience, as old as it is, in a way that more people could enjoy, of course. And so that's all well and good. But as we all know, games being received well and doing well doesn't necessarily mean that you'll get the follow-up by any means. But in the case of Gothic 2, I think it actually makes a ton more sense than you may well think, and the reason for that is that Gothic 1 and 2 are extraordinarily similar in a lot of ways. Basically, they use a lot of the same assets and art and all that, and they just kind of like made a second game with a lot of the same stuff. Tweaked a few things, admittedly made some big changes here and there, and Gothic 2, along with Night of the Raven, its DLC, are generally considered the best of the original trilogy. But what this means for game development in particular is that it really wouldn't be a big deal, and if anything, it would make more sense for them to keep all of the assets and things they've already made and then start building the sequel with not only that, but of course the systems that they've already made for the remake as well. So this would obviously give them a huge leg up on making that sequel, which would of course bring down development time, development costs, and lead to potentially us getting said sequel, at least sooner than you may well think. Development times have ballooned a bit since the time the originals were made, so hard to say how long we might actually be waiting, but I don't think it would be unrealistic to see this second game's remake in like 3 years. If, of course, it's something that happens. Mostly because a lot of the work could just be carried over, as I mentioned. And to that point, another thing of note is that it looks like some assets for Gothic 2 were kind of like already in the files of Gothic 1. Now, it's hard to say for sure that that was their intention, but there were like things like character models for characters that appear later, and there was also some stuff that was typically in Gothic 2 but actually makes an appearance in Gothic 1 Remake as well, so it's hard to say if they modeled that to be dual purpose or if they just wanted to add it to the first game. And all of that is obviously well and good, but believe it or not, there's even a little more than that. So obviously, I'm not the only person to have had these thoughts, and it was in response to some comments over on the Accolades trailer for Gothic 1 Remake as well, where THQ Nordic, at least on that channel, directly replied to people saying that they are taking in feedback about people wanting the remake. So I don't think it's much of a stretch to imagine that everyone involved sees all the pieces lined up here, provided, of course, that Gothic 1 actually sold as well as it seems to have done. Again, I would just need more financial information to know how much of a success that was, and obviously they're not going to give me that. So like I said, when you start adding all of that stuff together, it just seems really like the obvious choice to continue to go ahead and make this. Now, where things do get a little more awkward is, of course, people wondering about Gothic 3 for a variety of different reasons, not least of which because we haven't gotten 2 yet. It might be a little putting the cart before the horse on that side of things, but it also is difficult even beyond that just because Gothic 3 is quite a bit different than Gothic 1 and 2. And thanks to a falling out between the publisher Joe Wood and Piranha Bytes, it was a much more unfinished game than the others by comparison. And while there were some great ideas in there, none of it was really ever kind of fleshed out. And so in that way, I do think 3 is the one that could most benefit from a remake, frankly. But it would be a little more difficult to do it in comparison to the other ones. And I will simply save any more discussion on that for such a time as it seems like it might actually happen, I suppose. But to start sort of thinking about closing out this video, I guess the other thing it makes sense to touch on is, of course, what I would actually want from a Gothic 2 remake. And the answer there is a relatively few simple things. Like I mentioned, in a lot of ways, the systems and everything from Gothic 1 to Gothic 2 are extremely similar, and in that way they wouldn't really have to change much. But there were a couple of things from Gothic 2 that I think they could stand to take a look at, and given how well, I think just their instincts on what to change with Gothic 1 worked out, I'd be willing to hear them out either way. Now, one of them I think they actually kind of already handled in a similar way in Gothic 1, or at least what I would like them to do, which is making magic a little bit more available. Gothic 2 certainly has magic just the way the first game does, but it's a little more of a hassle to get your hands on. You can get a little bit of magic through the Paladin route, which is much more late game, and then if you join the Fire Mages, you can of course go through that faction, but joining them is honestly more of a hassle in Gothic 2. But the way Gothic 1 Remake handled this was just giving you access to like runes and stuff a little bit early, or at least like some basic ones to use, and I think the way they handled that there really worked out, and I would like to see them do something similar with a potential Gothic 2 remake. Kind of in that same vein, however, Gothic 2 is a game that is much more prone to min-maxing, and this is because of some of the changes made with Night of the Raven in particular, where the sort of, difficulty curve of it is a little more inclined to push you towards min-maxing. But the simple basics of it is that Gothic 2 has a just ridiculous amount of permanent stat buffs. The problem is if you use them when you get them, it actually lowers your potential maximum cap for these things, and you're going to want that cap as high as you can get it because of some of those balance changes. And while you can play through the game without doing that or worrying about it too much, it honestly just kind of feels bad, and I think just a simple way of letting the game continue to allow you to upgrade your base stats and stuff until you hit the soft cap, and then the extra bonuses you get from potions and the like add on top of that would be a really good way of removing that friction and making the entire experience a little bit better. And then of course there is expanding on things that we want to see expanded. They already did that with Gothic 1 Remake a little bit, and I think they did a great job there. I think there are certain zones and the like that could stand to be fleshed out and made bigger, and honestly just a chance to iterate on some of the systems that they've already laid the groundwork for, like their weather and the economy system and things like that, would make a ton of sense. So putting all of that together for the sake of this entire video, before we bring this to a close, I will simply say that not only does it seem like a really obvious choice to continue to make Gothic 2 Remake, it seems at least like there's interest on the development side of things as well, and so for all of those reasons, I'd be shocked if they didn't do it at this point. But I will say it might be a good while before we hear anything about this, or, whether they actually decided to do it or not. I will say that THQ Nordic does have a showcase coming up on August 7th, which isn't going to be covering a ton of stuff I want to see personally. But given that they're the publisher here, it is not impossible that they might mention something about this. However, that would be a little bit soon, and if the game is still a ways off, I could also definitely see them waiting for some time and choosing to sit on that information one way or another. But all of that said, as I mentioned, nothing is official, nothing is confirmed, but it looks good, and I hope it winds up happening. But for today, I do think that is pretty much going to do it. Certainly hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.